a firearm and discharge your weapon in self-defense, you could face hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and expenses. So carry the protection of CCW Safe, Self-Defense Legal Services membership. Upfront payment of all criminal and civil defense costs with no out-of-pocket for members.
Imagine this scenario. It's week 4 of a sustained national crisis, and your neighborhood looks the same as it did a month ago. Same houses, same streets, same faces. But your neighbor across the cul-de-sac just threatened another family over a generator. The guy 2 doors down, the one with the prep binders and the bug out bag, is making decisions that don't make any sense. Sustained crisis, compounding loss, and the collapse of familiar certainties begin breaking the American mind faster than they break the American body. And the damage is already moving through your zip code before most households even know what they're looking at. Tonight we're breaking down the psychological collapse that arrives before the physical one, and why the most dangerous threat in your neighborhood may not be a criminal, maybe your neighbor. Welcome to Survival Dispatch News for Wednesday, June 3rd, 2026. I'm Chris Evans, the CEO of Survival Dispatch. Joined tonight by my good friends, Combat Wounded Green Beret Randy Nance and 26-year CIA case officer, Jeff MD. Bottom line up front, in a sustained crisis, the psychological damage will arrive at your door before most households recognize it for what it is. And a population conditioned by decades of institutional safety nets and digital distraction will be catastrophically unprepared for the cognitive and emotional weight that's coming. When the mental framework breaks down at the kitchen table and at the neighborhood level, your household's prep plan will only be as strong as the mind's executing it. And irrational behavior spreading through your community will become a direct threat to your safety. So what we're covering tonight, we're going to walk you through the neuroscience of sustained stress response, thanks to Encyclopedia MD, the early warning indicators of psychological collapse visible in your community right now, the next escalation in this crisis arc, and then we'll identify the X your household is standing on right now and how you get off of it. So going directly into segment number 1, the neuroscience of collapse, why your mind will break before your body does. Your brain wasn't built for sustained open-ended crisis. It'll default to pattern matching against familiar threats and consistently misread the novel conditions a genuine collapse will produce. Every loss your household will absorb, power, routine, contact with family, financial stability, will stack on top of a cognitive load that's already degrading your judgment, and you won't feel the degradation until it's already driving your decisions. Tonight, the panel will walk you through why grief and loss compound decision-making impairment at a neurological level, and what the predictable failure modes will look like in individuals and households that have never stress-tested their mental frameworks. So I'm bringing everybody on stage here, and as per usual, I'm going to go directly to Jeff. Jeff, walk us through what actually happens to the prefrontal cortex, under sustained stress, and what that'll mean for the quality of decisions that households will make, let's say, week 3 of a genuine crisis.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody knows that when you're under stress, your body produces stress hormones, one of the primary ones being cortisol. And they're necessary, but they can also be damaging if they're constant. That's why when there's a high stress situation, you have this buildup, and then a release of that, and you're like, oh. Well, imagine building up, and it never fully releases. And so you're still cranking out the cortisol. You're still being hit with stimuli constantly, most of it negative. And your own brain can actually make it worse than it is, because you kind of what if situations to death, as paralysis by analysis kind of thing, and you can work yourself up into a lather essentially, and so those cortisol levels stay high, and when they do that, it damages the brain to a certain extent, but it also disrupts the brain function, in that your ability to think clearly kind of goes down. It's just like when you're in a panic and you lose fine motor skills. Well, imagine that happening over the course of 2 weeks, and it can really mess up your mental thought process. The things that are, routine, you wouldn't even think about it. You may, obsess over a decision whether to get a glass of water or not. There's all sorts of things that your decision-making process gets gummed up.
Yeah, it's a good lead in actually for the question for Randy, because as you were saying that, I'm thinking to myself, it's kind of like overloading your system with all these stressors. So, with that in mind, Randy, give me your thoughts on how grief compounds this overload. Like when you're put into a super stressful situation and then something happens, you lose a family member, a dog, something like that. How does grief just amplify this stuff?
Well, for most people, that is, it's going to make things, significantly worse. You just look at some of the cases we've seen that we all have, because, I know I have several examples throughout my life, and I guarantee everybody else does too, of somebody that lost a loved one, that the grief was more than overwhelming. And so, I always go back to, because I kind of use the grief thing too, like even when I became disabled, I kind of went through the 5 stages of grief, as they're called also. And the problem with grief is, it's one of those things, we kick the can down the road for a period of time. And that period of time could be short, or it could be very long. In fact, it could be years for some people. And the problem with that is grief, for lack of a better term, gets in the way of what you need to do in these moments. You know what I mean? So first of all, if you are in a situation like we were just talked about, where the adrenaline's up, one of the things is, as you talked about, is those fine motor skills. But the other part is also, unfortunately, it's like everything else. You've panicked before and went to grab something and dropped it. And why? It's because your body's only doing what it knows to do. And unfortunately, in those moments, a lot of times the bad habits come out. And it's why when we trained, if we made a mistake going through and clearing a house, and we would do it 10 more times to erase that mistake, so that in hopes and to ensure the fact that when the adrenaline kicks off, it's your good habits, or what you train to do, that pull you through the next 3 or 4 seconds, and not the bad habits. But then you topple grief on top of that. And you think about, generally in the beginning, right? It could be usually your first 2 steps are denial and depression, right? I say normally, it's not that way for everybody, and it's not 100%. And of course, situations and times and people will dictate how any of that plays out. But the fact is, we're usually in denial, or we're depressed when we first start into the grief process. And as we all know, those will be detrimental to anything you're trying to do to survive. Whereas, I'll put it this way, in uniform, and when you're overseas and you lose somebody, you really don't have the time to do that, unfortunately. And people say, well, how can you do that? Because you just have to keep taking one step in front of the other, and you are doing something. So it's not like you focus on the loss solely anyway. And, the fact of the matter is, you pack that thing away till you get home, and then you will deal with it at a different time. Whereas at the moment, you have to do your job. In the situation we're talking about, if you find yourself in that situation, you're going to be in the same situation that we were in, and unfortunately, it doesn't matter who you lose. You may not have the opportunity or the time to truly properly grieve at that moment. So you're going to have to find a way to set it aside until you can get to a moment that you can.
So would it surprise you when I tell you that November 2nd, 1996, when I lost my vision in this eye, a bunch of damage left side of my face, that I just went straight to anger? And I'm not joking. I was angry for years.
Well, that's an injury too, though. But you're right. I went to anger first, but I had to go through denial also. I also went through some little bit of depression. Those are the stages of grief, and anger is definitely one of them. But they all lead to one if you finally do it, and it's called acceptance. So,
quick audience poll: if you find Randy's new camera a little bit unsettling, like he's actually like right in front of you,
I'm almost not used to it myself.
put a 1 in the live chat. It's uncanny here. I'm like, holy shit, like Randy's right in my face. It's too much.
I think he's got all these filters now, and so he's messing with you.
Well, I don't know. I heard a rumor that it's the Brotox, that he's actually been doing a lot more than what he fessed up to. And
I cannot confirm or deny if Mike hooked me up.
Too funny.
I just thought of a decent analogy for that whole stress thing. It's like a DDoS attack on your brain.
Yeah, distributed denial system, overload.
More crap than your brain can handle.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. So that's funny you should say that, because my next question was really around the predictable failure modes that cognitive overload produces. Drill it down to tonight's topic, though. What will irrational behavior actually look like at, say, the household level and maybe like the neighborhood/community level?
I think you're going to see, you'll probably see people, because they've got so many things going on and they can't respond to all of them. They'll prioritize, one over others, and the one they prioritize may not make sense. And that may be the reason they're prioritizing it is it's either it's easy, or they're confident that they can do it, and they'll be successful at it. So it's sort of like, my house is on fire. I can't put out the fire, but I can certainly water the azaleas. I think you'll see people prioritizing sometimes even bizarre things, or they'll ignore really obvious things like, okay, honey, we're completely out of drinking water. That's okay, but I've got to fix the window screen on the bathroom. Okay, well, that's not going to keep us from dying of thirst, but it's something that he can do. And so you'll see people, when you have a whole list, you have a plate of all these issues, you focus on the one that you can do. And I think that's where you're going to see it, because they just shut down. They can't handle all of it.
I've seen that actually happen, more than once. Definitely valid observation on your point. Randy, we've been saying, for the better part of 4 or 5 years, that the majority of Americans have outsourced their security, either for their entire life or many, many decades at the very least. And I think there's a, conditioning effect to that I don't know if we could categorize it as normalcy bias, like we've talked about many times in the past, but I think that it makes our society more vulnerable to bigger calamities, right? I'm just curious what your thoughts are there. Basically, you've got most Americans, they've outsourced their security. They think it'll always be there. Then the rug gets pulled out from under them by some major calamity. I think that those people fare a lot worse than maybe people in other countries,
Well, you're right, because, in this country, we've lived in quite the bubble, haven't we, for quite some time, which has been good, but it leads to that old saying, right, where rough moments lead to hard men lead to easy times lead to weak men, or whatever the saying is.
Yep.
It's very true. And that's where we're sitting right now today in America, because we have had these freedoms that we protected for so long. And, for the longest time, for the most part, we had blind justice. Now, we've never had completely 100% total blind justice, but we were a lot better than where we are today. And then we actually held criminals accountable at once upon a time. And we're not doing any of that either. So, I forgot, what was the question, Chris? I'm sorry.
No, I was just curious what your thoughts are on how, again, I mean, I hate to pick on our country, but many
That's right.
Americans have just outsourced it, right? So I think that when a calamity happens to people who've outsourced their security, it's more shocking than people who live a harder life.
Well, it's like that when you think you know someone, right? And then they do something that changes that. It's no different, right? Those people that you're talking about, and I guarantee you there is a significant a number of them in this country. They just assume it's going to be this way. Remember, we talked about the 85% herd mentality. They just want to keep the blinders on and keep moving forward and hope and pray that everything works out okay. Those are the same people that when it does happen, and because they had pushed it so far back, they didn't even believe it was possible anymore. So then when it happens, it just takes everything out of them. And you're right. Then it takes them a long time to come around if they survive that part of it. But there's also the other side that we haven't talked about. And I've seen this happen, not a lot, but it has. Like there was a case, and I'm not going to say the guy's name. He was a Green Beret on a team. And I don't remember if it was Afghanistan or Iraq. But they went out, and unfortunately got into an ambush. And it was a pretty serious one. Fortunately for them, they were able to overcome it and get out. Problem is when that adrenaline kicks off and then you're in something like this where for a period of time, as you said, you can't stay up there forever. It's just not the way it works. Your body will just shut down at some point. But the reality is, over a little bit of time, generally most of us start coming back down and relaxing to a certain degree. But there are cases where that once that person gets turned on and whatever that situation was, and this particular person, once they got back to the team house, this guy was unable to put down his guns or take off any of his equipment.
Wow.
And I do believe this went on for 2 or 3 days before he finally fell asleep. Now, I won't go through everything else, but regardless, that can happen also. You can get that thing ticked up, and for some reason, they can't dial it back down. It took this guy 2 or 3 days, and he got sent somewhere after that. He did not stay on the team, because that's an issue, obviously. And I don't know what happened to him in the end, but the fact of the matter is he was unable to dial himself back down, and no one else on the team was there. Everybody tried, obviously. And you can only try so much when somebody's that dialed up and still walking around with a loaded weapon or two, right? So, so there's that also, that you have to, that can happen.
Yeah, that's it's incomprehensible for anybody who hasn't been in that situation. Let's just put it that way. Jeff, so when Randy's talking here, I'm thinking to myself, okay, you got Randy, other Green Berets, they go out, they do the thing. I'm not saying that it has no effect on them, but they come back and they're still functional. But then the wheels come off, like he just described with somebody else. Are there any indicators, like predictors of somebody being able to get through that stuff, or is it just happenstance?
Well, I don't know. Randy could probably answer that question more than me because he's seen both sides of it. I think people who have low-key personalities tend to do better in situations like that. Because people who get keyed up tend to be more emotional. And there's nothing wrong with being emotional, but there's some times when you don't really need people to be emotional. I remember in Afghanistan, we had a guy, Mohammed Obadullah, good dude, worked with us, was murdered. And, had to go back and get his car and I had to drive it back to the base, with his brains on the headrest.
Ugh.
And I was pissed. I was ready to kill anybody at that moment. I was just furious because he was such a nice guy. But that lasted for about probably a good 10 minutes. Because I was like, we got to find this motherfucker and kill him. But, didn't calm down. And then because I had other things I had to do, other responsibilities, I had a base to run. We had to deal with his family. et cetera, et cetera. But some people will get up to that level and stay there. And that's when you lose your ability to be rational. I can tell you, in those 10 minutes, I really was not rational. I was really, really pissed off. But at the end of the 10, I took a breath. I was saying, okay, I'm still in Indian country here. Someone just got shot, where I'm standing. Who's to say they're not still around? All that. So, we already secured the scene and everything else. But with you, I'm not an emotional person. But you get people who are, they may get up there and stay there, or it may take them a day or two to come back down. And if it's someone who's been killed that's close to you, yeah, I get that. I understand. But in a pressure situation, if you're counting on that person to cover your 6, he's got to be calm enough to remember what his job is, which is to see what's behind you. And if he's so busy ranting and raving, he's not going to help you out. So I would look for someone who's generally even keeled most of the time, all the time. And I think those people tend to handle it. And the other one is people who have experience in stress, cops, soldiers who have been in combat, that kind of thing, because it's not new to them. And that's the other thing. The first time it happens to you, it freaks you out. You've never seen it before. But I've seen plenty of dead bodies in my life. So seeing a dead body wasn't the big shock. It was the fact that it was my friend. But people who have never seen those kind of situations, they have no memories to fall back on.
So it's interesting you took it there. I just wrote down on my notepad here that I wanted to come back to Randy and ask him if the men that you've known over the years that you served with Randy, the ones who saw a lot of bad stuff, did they get conditioned to it? And it was, at least during the moment, maybe not in the long term, but during the moment, those guys handled it better because they were conditioned to it? Or on the other hand, as you were talking before about the guy with his loaded weapon, all I could think of was Full Metal Jacket, and the guy who lost his marbles and ends up committing suicide. But
Vincent D'Onofrio, he's a liberal, so it tracks.
That's right.
Oh my God. Anyway, talk to me about the conditioning. So is that a thing or no, Randy?
No. So I think, in the beginning, even like from the time you finished selection, I think I had told y'all, you finished the team portion. And, for me, that was basically 3 days of nonstop moving, many, many miles, and a lot of heavy and hard work. But then you come inside and, you don't get to go rest and sleep and wake up the next day or even later that day and then go fill out your paperwork. They take you in right then. So you not only go do all the paperwork, then you've got to peer everybody that was in your team. You got your pink card and your red card. And then they give you this 330 bubble question test that is a psychological eval.
Wow.
And, the unfortunate part is, the guy I was there with was one of the guys that we both moved from Fort Stewart up to Fort Bragg. And then we drove in his car back to Airborne. And then we came back to the course after Airborne. And, but he did this in selection. And they tell you not to, right? They say, listen, it almost was like they were talking to privates. Hey, Pri, in basic training, hey, Pri, when you fill this paperwork out, there's a lot of questions. We know you're tired. We know you can't stay awake. You're hungry, and all this. But don't just start filling in those circles, Pri. Don't do it. And they tell you in the beginning, too, there's some very weird questions in here. But what you have to understand is there's someone answered yes to it at some point. There were questions in there if you liked your sister. And I don't mean in a friendly way. You know what I mean? It asked if you like flowers. I can't even remember all because I was so tired. But I read every question and I filled out every little bubble. My buddy did not do that. He did at some point, but then he was like, screw it. He just, ABC'd it or whatever. So he got to go talk to the psychologist before we ever left before we left selection. I did not have to go. He had to go. And apparently he answered questions like he liked to excessively drink and beat his wife. And he
Wow.
put yes, and it's because it was one of those he just bubbled in. And so I think that they don't just use those psychological tests for degenerates, right? Because you don't want somebody that has some sort of character or personality flaw to go to the dark side. You definitely don't want to teach them everything they teach us how to do. You would not want to do that. But I think it is also for what you just mentioned. You know what I mean? To know if they're high and low or if they can ride in the middle of the wave and remain calm. And then it's a certain personality set that always makes it through and the rest don't. That's why it's a small number, one of the reasons. And most of the people are fairly confident in themselves and they believe in what they're doing and believe in themselves. However, it does take a toll. The more people you kill makes a difference. One is crossing the threshold, but 10, 20, 30 people have killed 100 folks. There is a difference that changes people. And then you got to realize but not just those, but buddies dropping along the way and all the engagements and gunfights and death and destruction they went through to get through that entire career. They do get, I don't want to say callous to it, but the game, just like I just told you, we already know, we already know because when we lose somebody, whether they got wounded or they were killed, just like when I got wounded, somebody had to pick up the whole combo plan because my senior, I was the junior echo. My senior came to me right away and said, hey, I'm going to do all the ASOT stuff. Now he was darker complected. He had the right hair, the right skin, the right eye color. So he fit in that, but he still should have never given up his job. But regardless, I didn't care. My exact thought, as soon as he asked me, he said, do you got all the commo? Because I'm going to stay with the sourcing and all the intelligence work. I said, no problem. I got it. Because in my head, the first thing I thought was, hey, if you're going to give me your job, I'm going to take it. That's exactly what I want to do. I never complained. I didn't complain to him. I never went to my team sergeant or anybody else. I just carried on the mission. Problem was, after I got injured, he had no idea where any of the commo plan was. Now it's not hard. He's now going to have to be the one to go get the new crypto updates every time and to fill the radios every week. But all the rest of it, he had no awareness of. And that's a problem because when I was gone, somebody's got to pick that up and run. So yes, we do feel it when someone's gone in many different ways. And that's the biggest way because now we all have to pick up what this person was doing and we have to separate his job out into everybody else. So it puts more work on everybody else, but that does help keep you busier. So you have less time to sit there and start dwelling on what just happened. But you get better at as unfortunately, as you get more experience doing that, you do get better at it. But I think it takes a certain type of person to be in the right frame of mind, or you wouldn't make it through all that to begin with.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you're saying at all. I think reps count for everything, number one. And number two, there's some personalities that just are not predisposed to certain things. Jeff, reeling it back in, Jeff, to like the community level. So imagine, we've got some calamity, whatever it may be. Maybe we're at war, maybe terrorist attacks, maybe, wildfires, hurricanes wiping out an area, whatever the case may be. When people start to, go downhill psychologically, how fast does that feasibly move through a community? Is it kind of just the weak people get hit, or is it something like wildfire or somewhere in between?
Well, I think for the most part, it's really dependent on the person, and you could have 10 strong personalities and not a single one of them loses it like that, or you could have 10 people and 8 of them lose it like that. People handle stress differently, and you'll probably be surprised. You may see someone that you say, I bet he'll handle it fine, and he may lose it. And then you have some little nerdy dude who you think, oh God, he'll be the first one to die. And he turns out to, come into his own, and, he's the guy in charge. But I think it can spread because I think we all have peer pressure, whether we like to admit it or not. And if you're in a group, say you've got a mag and there's 10 families in it, and you're starting to feel like you're going to lose it, and then you look at everybody else and you go, well, they're not losing it, so I can't lose it. So the peer pressure is, okay, I've got to man up here. But if somebody else loses it, and another person loses it, it's almost like, well, you've got permission to lose it too. And then that's when it's not that it's necessarily contagious, but I think those other people were on the verge, and it just kind of pushes them over the edge. It's just, when do they lose it?
Well, it's funny you said contagious, because I just wrote it down on my pad here that certain, call it types of energy, like people energy, can be very contagious.
It's spiritual.
It's very contagious.
The mob mentality is the same.
Mob mentality is
there
contagious.
You go.
Yeah. Same thing.
Good point. So, Randy, we've talked at length with regards to stress inoculation as it relates to firearms. And, we've quoted Sun Tzu multiple times: human beings never rise to the occasion, they follow their level of training. So it's like the guy in Lumberton, North Carolina, the guy, steals the F-350, the door's open. The good guy's 5 feet away, takes 5 shots, misses all 5 shots, then gets run over and killed. And a lot of people have no concept of what happens to your fine motor skills and your accuracy when your stress level goes off the chain. But there's lots of ways to train for that, right? We can run and gun and do all kinds of things. You put your hands in a bucket of ice for 60 seconds and let's see how good, your fine motor ability is. But as I was writing the brief for this episode, I was thinking to myself, geez, like, how the hell do you stress inoculate against this psychological side? And the only thing that I came across that sounded legit to me, which is going to be in your wheelhouse, was to tabletop stuff. So you have your group or your family around the table and saying, okay, here's the scenario, and here's what, we would do if X, Y, or Z unfolds. It's the same stuff you guys do as a Green Beret before you go out on missions, right?
Every time, and after. It's before and after. Before is all the planning phase, and then it's the little run through of this is what's going to happen. And then, as you know, then afterwards, we do the after action review, which basically is, this is what happened. These were the mistakes. This is how we could do it better next time, type of thing. So that's a never ending process in the military, and certainly in special operations. You're constantly doing that.
Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense. So normally we thank our sponsors at the end, but I got to mention this quickly here. You can see the countdown. So you have 5 hours and 22 minutes, and the Carnival bulk buy is over. If you want to get the best possible prices on 100% American beef, chicken, or pork, I'm going to put the link out there. I think I did earlier, but I'll put it out again. Expire soon. Basically, Carnival they've spent many hundreds of thousands of dollars to expand onto Amazon. As a result of that, they got a pretty decent savings, which, keep in mind, margins are really skinny in meat. And they wanted to thank my audience, our audience, as well as Mike Glover's audience, because we were the first ones who really started promoting Carnival. I'll put a link in the live chat again in just a second, but as you can see, the countdown is active. So with that being said, I want to get into the next segment here, which is titled The Early Warning Indicators: What Psychological Collapse Will Look Like in Your Neighborhood Before It Becomes Dangerous. The early warning indicators of psychological collapse in your community will be behavioral, not physical. And you'll need to know what you're looking at before the signals escalate into something that you can't de-escalate. Your neighbors will cycle through denial and panic, which is interesting that Randy and Jeff hit on both of those words, with no stable middle ground. Aggression will spike in routine interactions, and individuals who seem steady will begin making decisions that don't track. These aren't character failures. They're symptoms of a system overloaded past its design threshold, the human brain. So the most dangerous phase will come when the community's planning window collapses entirely and short-term relief starts getting prioritized over strategic position. And by the time that phase arrives, the behavioral window for early intervention will be closed by that particular point in time. So, Jeff, coming straight to you, what do you reckon the first visible behavioral indicators are of a psychological collapse in a neighborhood? And the reason I ask is because I want you to throw it out there so both myself as well as our audience know what to even look for.
Well, if there's, your neighborhood's under stress or under siege, however you want to call it, and there's going to be a new normal as far as behavior. So that'll start immediately. But when people start deviating from that, if you have someone who's normally, maybe they're in their house, and then anytime you're out, they come out to talk to you to see what's going on, to get in, kind of get intel. And then they go from that to, basically logging themselves in the house 24/7, or vice versa. If there's someone who is kind of hunkered down inside their own home and, never ventured out, and now all of a sudden they're venturing out and trying to get information from you, which is nothing wrong with getting information. Depends on what they're asking about. If someone's coming up to me and now they're saying, gee, I'm out of food. Are you out of food? Do you have any food? You got any food to spare? What they're doing is probing for, okay, should I rob you? And that's something you need to be alert to. They're going to, you're going to start seeing almost panicked behavior, depending on what the situation is. If they're out of water, they may come to you and say, hey, we're out of water. You got any water you can spare? And you may, and say, okay, if this needs to be purified, it needs to be filtered or something. But you're going to sense a desperation, because that's what it is. If someone is starving, they're going to get real brave.
Yeah. Bob, I mean, how long have I been saying we're never more than 3 missed meals away from anarchy? I mean, people beat the crap out of each other for a TV on Black Friday. What are they going to do when their household has no food? It's bad, right? Randy, I don't know if this question can be answered or not, but why do they cycle back and forth, like you said, between denial, panic, back to denial, panic? Do you have any idea why that is, or what causes that flip-flopping?
I would think that's probably some sort of emotional instability, right? Or, maybe not everybody's the strongest mentally, right? So maybe that's got something to do with being a little bit mentally weak. I don't know, because as you mentioned earlier, and it is absolutely true, when you said that your mind will give out before your body will, and generally that is the case. I mean, one of the best examples I had, people always say, well, I always thought like the biggest, hugest guys were the ones, and the big, strong dudes that got through, and that's what everybody's looking for, like even for special operations, but it isn't true. As somebody you mentioned earlier, and several in the chat have mentioned, sometimes those nerdy guys, the 2 baddest dudes that ever been in CAG aren't all the famous ones that just came through GWAT. One of them did. He caught in on the front half of it. But the reality is those 2 guys, and one of them came from the Vietnam era when it was started. And this looks like the little bitty old guy with glasses could be your homeroom teacher, no joke. Or your local postman. Neither one of these are big in stature, but they've done everything that you can even imagine and more. And so it's not always that, but I think that it's the mental part is the biggest piece, because even going through the Q course, I started a while ago with the biggest guys, the guys that are the biggest and the bulkiest in the gym aren't, some of those guys got through, but generally they didn't make it all the way through the course. And that's why the course is built the way it is, probably as long as it is too, because at some point, and I saw some of these guys cry real tears when their dreams came to an end there on Camp McCall. And it's because at some point they got as far as their body and their physical strength was going to bring them, and they didn't have the mental fortitude or the mental strength to keep going. And when that happens, just like you said, I don't care who you are, you're gone. It's done. It's over. You're going to stop right there. You will not go any further. And it's just the truth of the matter. I learned this in martial arts a long time ago when I was a kid, but it was also a reoccurring theme in special operations. What everybody has to realize is everything we do is 70% mental, 30% physical. I don't care if it's when you first learn to put a fork to feed yourself in your mouth. That's 70% mental right there, learning that. And if you don't believe me, look at everybody that had a head injury. Like even mine, I had to learn how to walk again just from a ding on the head and some nerve damage. But I go back to that reporter, right? Who was the Bob Woodward, or isn't that his name? The guy got blown up in Afghanistan and Iraq and was reduced basically to a vegetable. His family had to take him through, but of course, ABC, he was a reporter for them. He had the best care known to man that he got, that medical care. And if you look at him now, you can only tell by a couple scars on his face, because even when he's on TV, he's very articulate and is right back to where he is. Where I know quite a few guys in the Army ended up like that, they're still that way to this day, because they did not get the best care known to man right away, and then to carry them through that mental injury. And we also know that some of them aren't coming back out of it. The damage is so significant, you're not coming back out of it. But it just lends to the piece. Everything is 70% mental, because even you learn how to walk or feed yourself, your brain had to learn how to do it with your body first and get your muscles to cooperate. So,
as you're saying this, I'm thinking the old adage that the body follows the mind. And that could be in a big example or a small example. Small example, would be if you have somebody working on a framing crew, for example, and they're convinced that they're going to fall off the wall that they're walking, they'll fall off the wall.
That's right.
If somebody has a terminal illness and let's say it's not terminal, but it's on the verge of being terminal, and they have a chance of getting through it, but they think they'll never make it, they won't make it.
It goes back to that same old saying, you can or you can't. Either way, you're right, because you believe it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I think it's if you can, or you think you can, or you think you can't, you're right.
Correct.
Basically.
That's right. Because you believe it either way. And that makes the difference. That mental fortitude is what makes the difference. It's why not everybody can become a Green Beret. Not everybody can be in the CIA. It's just how it goes.
For sure. Jeff, I want to hear your thoughts on aggression. I mean, I personally think that we've seen like a massive explosion of aggression in our society and culture in the past couple decades. Even, I would argue, even in the past 5 years. How do you think that increase in aggression and in like these routine interactions, how does that function as an early warning signal, or is it not an early warning signal and it just means these people are flat out crazy?
Well, I think in certain individuals, if you have someone who is normally level-headed and sane and all that, and then all of a sudden he's being aggressive and in your face or snapping at everybody, that's a warning sign right there, because that's abnormal behavior for him. Now, if he's been a hothead his whole life and he's a hothead today, that's not really a change for him. He's just a douchebag. That happens. But it's the changes in behavior that you've got to be more attuned to. If the dog snaps at you every time you walk by the house, that's just a bad dog. But if the dog who you normally pet every day and is all happy to see you and licks your hand turns around and bites you, something's wrong. That applies to people too. And I think with our society, it's become much more accepting of violence in ridiculous public situations. You think about you see all these videos of people on airplanes who, get in fist fights with the damn, the flight attendants, or you look at people standing in line at the bank and then get pissed off and start a fist fight because they think somebody's cutting in line. There's a lot of things that normally you would never see. It certainly has not come to violence, but people's responses to things are over the top. And it's like, and I think part of it is people have no shame anymore. They don't realize, okay, you look like a freaking moron, but they don't care and they do it anyway. And look at the Antifa idiots. they go up to some cop or some, National Guardsman, F you, F your family. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill your kids. And because they know nothing's going to happen to them when they do it. In the old days, man, they'd have gotten a thumping. There'd have been a nightstick in their ear about 2 seconds after that happened, and nobody would care. When I was growing up, if you got whomped on by the cops, they would say, whatever you did to get whomped on, don't do it again. And that's basically the way it was.
I'm not going to name the person's name, but I was told an interesting story last year from a longtime law enforcement officer. And he said to the group of guys he was with, they were in the midst of, getting ready to engage the bad guy, right? And he said, okay, everybody turn your body cams off. We are getting ready to discuss tactics. And some young new cop was like, well, we can't do that. That's against policy. And I mean, what are you going to do when the cameras are off? And he said, listen, we can't discuss tactics while the body cams are on, because it could be introduced in court and then our tactics would be known to everybody. So the guy agrees to turn it off. Everybody turns their body cams off, and they grabbed a hold of the perpetrator. They gave him some 1970s justice, cuffed him, threw him in the back car. Then they turned their body cams back on again. So if you're in law enforcement, feel free to co-opt that idea. I thought it was pretty brilliant, to be honest with you.
Yeah, see, we would do the same thing. We'd go, okay, you need to go be on the cordon for us. Head on outside, buddy.
Right. That's too funny. Jeff, I just want to tack one more thing on to the question I had for you. Obviously, I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist or anything even close to that, but I've read that when people blow a gasket, in many times it indicates that they've reached their maximum stress level, and it's almost like it figuratively, metaphorically blows the lid off because they got to get it out, or I don't know, they go into even worse mental state. Is that kind of jive?
Yeah, because there's all that thing. Oh, you're internalizing and it's bad for you. Well, it might be, but it's a stress release. Some people hit a heavy bag. Some people, go outside and just scream. Some people, they may go to the gun range and fire off, 100 rounds. People have different ways of dealing with it. Some people just blow up, and then 2 minutes later, they're okay again. I think those are called Italian women, but I don't know. I'm going to get hate mail for that. So, oh, well, get over it.
Well, you could probably say people of Greco-Roman descent in general.
Okay. But I mean, there are some people who they have a short fuse, they explode, and then they're okay. The ones you worry about are the ones that have the really, 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 really long fuse, because there's a huge powder charge there that everybody else needs to get really far away from when it blows.
It's always
you don't want to be standing next to them when it blows.
It's always the quiet, unassuming guy, man. Always. Mm-hmm. I played football with a guy named Chris Bailey, and he was he was a specimen athletically, and he almost ended up in the NFL, and then he had a serious injury. But he was the calmest, nicest guy you can ever imagine. And after we graduated, we go to bars and stuff like that, and he'd be the quiet guy. And a couple times I saw him come unglued, and he was like the last guy that you wanted to tangle with. He was, had the ability to go from the nicest guy in the room to your biggest, threat in the room.
Well, the problem with those people is then it takes them like I'm that way, Jeff. I can get mad, but then I can get over it in about 30 seconds, depending on the situation. But the people that it takes a long time to get mad, it takes them a very long time to get unmad too. Once they get mad, it doesn't just go away.
But Ken Shamrock is the nicest,
isn't he?
Soft-spoken guy. I'm just a grandpa, and he goes, yeah, you're a grandpa. Could beat me to death in about 2 seconds if you wanted to. And he's still in great shape for as old as he is. He's younger than me. I keep saying he's old. He's not. But yeah, he's not the guy you want to piss. And I have a feeling it takes him a long time to get mad, but you don't want to be there when he does.
Yeah, so check this out. There we go, folks. I keep telling you, I'm like the Forrest Gump of the business world. On this side of the screen over here, that's Ken Shamrock. And then you can see my wife, then Jen, Dr. Jen, then myself, and then my wife, and then Don Mann, good friend of ours.
Don's another one who I've never seen him angry. I wouldn't want to see him angry, but I've never seen him angry.
I think one of the craziest conversations I ever had with Don Mann, and for those of you who aren't familiar, Don's former SEAL Team 6 and a lifetimer or full career, 20 years. He was a CW3, if memory serves me right. And then he went into the CIA for 20 some odd years. Jeff, this was before you joined the podcast, so we're going back better part of 5 years now. And somebody asked him a question, about having to use deadly force or whatever. So he tells this story, and this is when he's in the CIA and he's out of the country, and some guy is acting really ignorant towards other people. And then the guy focuses on Don's table, and they've got women at the table and stuff. And I'm going to compress it right down to this. Don said, well, after he did that, I killed him. And then we just carried on. he didn't even bat an eye. He just said, well, I killed him. And that was the end of that sort of thing. But Randy, I don't know if you have one of these or not, these contingency planners from Mad Gear.
I guess I'm going to have to get one. Since you and Mike have one, I'm going to have to get one.
Well, I've got the first gen and the second gen, and I don't have any relationship with the guy who owns this. I do have a discount code, but I don't collect any affiliate income. And there's a reason I'm mentioning this, because it's going to set you up for the next question. So you can get all kinds of refills and stuff for it. And there's different pages for different things. Like this one here has some stuff that primes you to fill it out. It's like an SHTF planner that, you share with your family or your group, right? Yeah. Well, one of the exercises in there, Jeff, or Randy, pardon me, is to do like let's call it a temperature map of the people in your neighborhood. So basically you write down, okay, this guy is reliable. That person over there is a recluse. This person over here is unhinged. And that drives to the question I got to ask you. What happens when individuals that you assess to be like totally stable before, the fecal matter hit the oscillating device, and then they start exhibiting erratic behavior, unpredictable behavior, that potentially gets, aggressive behavior, violent behavior? Talk to me about the exercise. Is it worthwhile mapping people in something like this, or no?
Well, I would say that let's just take journaling, right? And I wish I had been I'm not a journaler, but I wish I had been, because of the amount of detail that you put in there, right? And then it reminds you of things. So anything that you take notes on in your neighborhood is probably a good idea, certainly in this time of day. And that includes color coding everything, including your neighbors. And if you've got neighbors that and again, the other part of it is, yes, it's good to take those notes because you know where they were beforehand, right? Because as we've already mentioned, it doesn't matter if they're the unhinged one or they're the most stable one. Nobody knows how any of them are going to act until it actually happens. So when shit hits the fan, we don't know how it's going to affect all these people, but you would have a baseline of how they were beforehand. And certainly the longer time of period you've covered, it's not like you've got to write something about your every neighbor every day. But as we all know, there are different things you notice every day, every week, every month. And as time goes by, you notice different ones. It is good to put all that down because, again, it gives you that baseline. It gives you their patterns, and it's just smart.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I also like the fact that you mentioned color coding. So for those who aren't familiar with it, it's called a RAG system, red, amber, green. So you basically you can score or identify something. Red, okay, obviously it stands out, it's bad. Amber, kind of middle of the road. Green, kind of good to go. So yeah, that's awesome, Randy. I just put a link to maggear.shop. And they've got a new app out, by the way, called Ready Plan for your phone. So you can have multiple family members that have the dead tree format, the paper one, where you've put together your plans, your rendezvous, all the things. And then you can also have your family all have the smartphone app So everything's synchronized in real time. It's a really cool product from the guy's named Sam something. I mean, 73214. That was my high school locker combination in 1982. Introduced me to somebody, asked me what their name is 5 minutes later. I can't tell you what their frickin' name is. It's crazy,
Well,
man.
you know, that's why I like that. One, it makes it private proof. And I'll just say, because somebody asked earlier when I was going right? For those of you who don't know, when you're in basic training, or certainly when I was, if a drill sergeant was talking to you or even the whole group, and he was putting out an announcement, instead of saying the whole word private, he would just go, brah, and they would shout, this is that, or that's this. And that's what that means. So what color coding does is simplifies things. It makes it private proof. In the military, that's what you call it, private proof or idiot proof. And not all privates are idiot, but privates do most of the work. They make most of the mistakes. So it's making things private proof in the military, and color coding things makes it private proof. So even in the miller, when shit is hitting the fan and you're panicking, if you've got a color code system, you at least know what those colors mean, and you grab the right lever, right? Or whatever it is.
Yeah. I mean, I use the rag format for all kinds of stuff. Jeff, I'm curious what your thoughts are, you know, as far as the abandonment of long-term thinking. How does that happen during SHTF at the community level? In other words, like, when do the decisions start getting less and less rational and more knee-jerk or even emotional as you go through the stages of SHTF?
I think when people move from long-term planning, assuming they even get to the long-term planning in the first place, to is when they're starting to feel desperation or hopelessness. If you see, you know, okay, shit hits the fan, what do you want to do? What are you going to need to do? Or you're going to need to ration your food. You're going to need to ration your water. You're going to need to, you know, maybe keep the lights out in your home, not to draw attention to yourself, things like that. If someone has done that and then all of a sudden they're doing the opposite of that, you know, they're sitting in a metal tub full of water in the front yard, and, you know, just dumping water over their head, or they're eating a big meal, or they're having the lights on all night. Yeah, that's because they've kind of given up, or they don't think there is a long term. If you think you're going to die tomorrow, why save? You know, and sadly, some people who are going to live to be in their 80s live their lives like that, and that's why they have absolutely nothing in the bank and nothing in their pantry, because they spend it as fast as they make it.
Before I give Randy the last question here, I just want to tack on to what you just had to say. When people give up, would you estimate that isolation maybe is like one of those steps? They just give up and start isolating themselves. And I guess my next question that is, if that's the case and people isolate from other people in your neighborhood, what effect does that have on overall security for the community if people just close the door like a fortress mentality?
Well, if you're depending on them to be part of your mutual assistance group, yeah, it's a big problem. But yeah, I think that is common. That's why not to be morbid about it, but you see reports of someone who has committed suicide, and someone last saw them 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month before, because either they're a recluse or they've cut off human interaction. And if you know you're, you know, in someone who's suicidal in their case, if you know you're going to kill yourself, human interaction is not a big deal, because you're trying to get away from life. So why would you invite more life into your house? So I think that is but it could also be that, okay, they think everything's going to go to hell. They've got enough to survive on. They don't want anybody else hitting them up for food or, you know, ammunition or whatever. So they just kind of lock themselves. It's like, I'll just sit here, cover my ears, and pretend no one can see me. You know, it's like the little kid who's, you know, la, 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 la. There might be a part of that in there as well. Or, you know, like I say, it could be very much, hey, I've got my shit covered. Screw the rest of you. I'm just going to lock myself in my house and wait for you guys to die off.
Well, I mean, we've talked about this ad nauseum, so I won't go too deep down the rabbit hole. But at the end of the day, if people want what you've got and they arrive in numbers,
They're
there's
going
not
to
a
get it.
there's nothing you can do to stop them whatsoever. Nothing you can do. You can have all the fortifications you want. It ain't going to stop the mob.
Well, this is like the underground bomb shelter with the big heavy steel door that they can't get through. You just lock yourself in there and wait, so eventually they're all going to die off. If I can sit here for 6 months, yeah.
If you have enough, sustainment, right?
Yeah.
So, Randy, you get the last kick at the can here for segment number 2. We always talk about how there's like this early warning phase for many things, right? It's easy to talk about like in hurricane context because we've done it many times. We've lived through it. The evac order goes out. Most Floridians are like, yeah, whatever. And then all of a sudden there's a Cat 5 bearing down on us. People are like, oh shit, I need to get out of Dodge. And then it turns the interstate into a parking lot. I'm curious what your thoughts are. What does the early warning phase look like as far as when does it end, when the behavior in the community, X amount of time into this, hypothetical SHTF event, when is that behavioral window for early intervention closed and now the community is just an unsafe, dangerous place to be?
I would say it's a matter of hours. Less
Wow.
than a full day, I would bet.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Because I think that, as you know, same thing with Florida and hurricanes. How quick is it that the criminals are already out looting? Pretty much as soon as people leave because they know they're leaving. And
True story.
it's just the unfortunate truth of the matter. It's human nature. And so, I would say that, if it was some sort of attack like what we've talked about, it was over 10, 15, or 20 cities at once. So the moment that hits the news, don't wait for them to decide if this is a real terrorist attack, because of course they can't determine that on the news for a period of time anymore for some reason. But if or something else goes on and that the shit hitting the fan is coming, that's your time to get out. Because if you wait more than 3 or 4 hours, everybody else is going to be thinking the same thing. You don't want to be in the part that Chris just talked about, where when everybody finally gets up to move and now the interstates are like parking lots, because that's exactly what will happen. None of these roads were built, and I don't care what city you're in or what rural area. Those roads were never built to be able to take every car from every household that lives in that area at the same time. It's just not possible. It's why going to work traffic and going home to traffic looks so much worse than the rest of the day. And so just imagine then, because probably still half the people aren't going to work or school in those, now everybody's leaving, you won't get out. So I would bet you've only got about a 4-hour window if you're lucky.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think hours is the right way to look at it as well. And I think a lot of people are afraid to let go, right? So like, no, we can just hang it.
They want to, I'm going to keep them blinders on, hope this works out. This isn't it. It's not it yet.
If you're wrong, you can always drive home.
That's right. That's right.
True story.
And no one will know the difference.
No
shame.
It was a road trip.
That's
True
right.
story. I just put the link out there for y'all on the Carnival bulk buy. Again, they're going on to Amazon. They bought hundreds of thousands of dollars of raw meat because that's what Amazon demanded for their freeze-dried product in multiple distribution centers. So they wanted to say thank you to our audience and Mike Glover's audience because we were the first ones that started promoting Carnival. This is their way of saying thank you. I don't know if we'll ever see something like this again, but take advantage of it. You got 4 hours and 51 minutes and it runs out. So with that being said, we're going to go into the third and final segment per usual, and it's the next phase. In other words, when desperation overrides moral guide rails. The psychological deterioration we've covered tonight won't stay at the level of bad decisions and irrational behavior. It'll move into a phase where the moral frameworks that have governed the community behavior for our entire lives get rewritten rather than abandoned. And that rewrite will happen quietly before you see any overt sign of it. In other words, the neighbor who will eventually become a threat to your household, they won't believe that they're doing anything wrong. They will have like constructed some sort of internal justification that in their mind makes their actions, not just necessary, but righteous. And, you won't see a monster when you look at them, when you see them. And that's a bad situation to be in when all of a sudden, they jump you, they got the element of surprise. So the next episode that we're going to do on this, by the way, which will be, try to keep track of my days here, Friday, we're going to examine the specific conditions that will accelerate that transition from psychological deterioration to active community threat, and which households in your area or your community or your neighborhood will be, the first ones to cross that threshold. So with that being said, as per usual, creature of habit here, going back to Encyclopedia MD, Jeff, why won't people recognize that their moral framework has been rewritten? I mean, what's the thought process that goes through people's heads that makes someone feel justified in doing things they would have found completely unacceptable, maybe even just like days ago, not even weeks ago, maybe just days ago?
Oh, potentially even hours ago. There's a couple of things. One, people can and do rationalize almost anything. Because no one likes to think of themselves, most people don't like to think of themselves as a bad person. But it may start with, okay, it's okay, I'll steal fruit off your tree because, well, you can't eat it all anyway. So then they'll take it. And then it'll be, well, let me get some vegetables out of his garden in the middle of the night because he's got more than he can eat, really, and I need it. Or they're going to say, my kid's hungry, I'll do whatever it takes to feed my kid. Well, notice whenever they say, I'll do whatever it takes, what it doesn't include is growing their own food or finding their own food, foraging for their own food out in the wild. No, it's taking somebody else's food because that's the easiest way to achieve what they're trying to achieve, which is put food in their belly. But yeah, it's desperate times call for desperate measures, and people are really, really good at rationalizing. And I'll be honest with you, if I had little kids and they were starving, man, I'd do whatever I had to get them food. I'm not going to sit there and watch my children starve. But at the same time, you've got to recognize what I'm doing. I'd have to recognize what I'm doing is morally wrong. Now, is it more wrong than letting my kids starve to death? No, it's not. But if I'm killing your kids so that my kids can live, yeah, that is morally wrong under any stress. You're killing an innocent person to save a different innocent person of your choice. Yeah, that's evil. So sure it's is. Just it's how far do people let themselves go?
Well, Randy, let's unpack that a little bit here. So when I was researching, putting this brief together for us tonight, I was looking for, potential patterns that we could look for in real life, that our audience could look for in real life, like call it behavioral patterns, signatures, whatever you want. Oh, Amazon's there. For once, it's not my dogs setting off the Amazon alarm bell. Anyway, what I'm getting at, Randy, is like behavioral, aspect signatures, whatever you want to call them, that comes before the aggression, visible hostility, people just throwing their moral code out the window. Believe it or not, the one thing that I kept coming across over and over again was people who isolate themselves. And the longer they're isolated, the more antisocial they become, and the less they give a shit about things like moral frameworks is concerned. I'm curious what your thoughts are as far as any behavioral patterns outside of people isolating that you could say that guy's going to snap. It might not be tonight, but it might be tomorrow or the next day. What are you looking at to determine that?
We're watching it right now, right? I mean, on all these peaceful protests that have been around for the last several years and the ones that are cooking up now all the way back to the No Kings
right.
protest. You look at those people, right? It's not just, you're right, though. The people that isolate themselves, we used to call them hermits. And some people did go off in the middle of nowhere and stayed forever. Those were hermits. And good for them because they never hurt anybody else. They stayed out there until they died. That's not the way it goes today. So yes, people isolating themselves is not good, because that usually, it's detrimental to your health, your mental health. And that's just a fact. It's why God made Eve. Man was not meant to be alone. And so it didn't take him long to figure that out. And it's how we all work. It's just how it is. But the flip side of that is what we talked about a while ago, when you're together as a group and that mob mentality, right? That gets people going off even when they might not have. And that's less predictable. You can't say, oh, they're going to go off. But once they get in a crowd and all of a sudden this mob mentality takes over, you don't know, people, that is the problem with the mob mentality. Then they do things that they would never do otherwise, or alone or separately. They wouldn't have done any of that stuff. But collectively, they came together, and that mob mentality, because that's a spiritual thing. It's no different than when you sense trouble, as we've talked about many times, and the hair stands up on the back of your neck, or you get a feeling about somebody. That's a spiritual thing. And that's why we don't understand it as much, because we're not good at spiritual things. We're human, and we're morals, and we're mortals. So that's how we see it. And it's one of the problems we have, period. It's why people have a hard time understanding the Bible. People say all the time, it don't make no sense. And it's because it was a spiritual book written by a spiritual being in a spiritual way. And so we have to use our spiritual side to understand it better. And most of us aren't too good at practicing at using that spiritual side. But, the mob mentality is the same thing. And so, it's whether it's a individual or the mob, when people start yelling and, like you said, or start acting out in ways that aren't exactly normal, or they seem that they're coming unhinged, even if it's only a little bit, or you see that there's just a subject that constantly, instantly sends them from 0 to 100 in an instant, right? That's an indication that person, as you mentioned a while ago, is probably, if they had one of those little red meters where you had green at the bottom and it went up to yellow and then to red, when it's tapping out, that's what that would be. And so those are the two different cases, but it's the same thing. If someone's isolating, you may not see some of that, but if you know that you don't ever see your neighbor, they're isolating, they probably look differently every time you see them the next time, or maybe they don't even say hello when you say hello back to them and they don't respond back. But, it's the same old common sense, human nature things. When you see people start to act out and do things, as Jeff mentioned a while ago, that they don't normally do, and it's abnormal behavior, that is an indicator. It is why law enforcement looks at that, like the homicide detectives and other major crime detectives. One of the things they want to know is, okay, who in this crowd all of a sudden, did something differently or out of pattern or acting out in ways that they didn't used to, because that indicates that something's going on with that individual. And again, they may be hitting their end point and they've had it up to here, and now the water is coming above their nose. They're going to panic, and then they're going to act out. And so those are the kind of indications you would look for. But as we look and see more of these demonstrations take place and stuff like that, those are also indications that we're moving towards something. So as we know, we've watched the momentum build. It's not as fast as we probably thought it was going to be in the beginning, but it's still building to something. So at some point, there has to be a release, whether it's an individual that's, just reaching their max end. That's why people call, well, I just snapped and then this happened. That's what that is.
So, I appreciate appreciate your comprehensive answer, Randy. This is number 3. I managed to kill 2.5 of these.
I know he just made me hungry right there.
I'm telling you, I could eat the bark off a tree right now. I'm freaking starving. You can't run a V8 on a gallon of gas, so I'm going to probably eat from now until the time we wrap up, and then after we wrap up, Jeff, when we talk about like that window to get out of Dodge before it's too late to get out of Dodge, if your community, your neighborhood gets to that mob mentality level, it's probably too late to get out of Dodge.
Yeah.
So what does a neighborhood look like in that in-between phase where some of the households have clearly thrown out their moral code, but maybe some others haven't. What does that look like? Because I think that's the point that is your last chance to get out.
Yeah, the scary thing is when if you have two households that have lost their compass, and they team up together. Now you've got a small mob, and it's sort of like inside the wire. If you're trying to defend your neighborhood and you've got a couple of houses, a couple of families, 2 or 3 in the neighborhood they're the problem, not the solution. It's like you say, in the old Vietnam, we got gooks in the wire. That's a problem because they're behind you now. And, but yeah, it's bad enough to have one. You can probably handle one, but if you get 2 or 3 or 4, all of a sudden you're outnumbered. And instead of protecting your neighborhood from people on the outside, you're trying to do both. And it's like trying to fight a battle when you have infiltrators. It's very difficult.
We got to do a quick audience poll. Is it politically correct in 2026 to use the word gook? Inquiring minds want to know.
It's a reference. It's a legitimate reference to a colloquialism used in Vietnam and in Korea, by the way.
Listen,
it's like calling Germans Krauts. We don't do that anymore, but they do in war movies all the time.
I'm like the president of the unpolitically correct department, so you don't have to worry about me. I'm just curious. Doherty says, "Yep, we got a 1 happening right there."
I don't care anyway. People say that's not politically correct. Okay, neither am I.
That's 3 down now.
You're a dick. And I'm sorry.
I'm still hungry. Hey, check it out. I got a ghost pepper one here just for
now you're just teasing me.
So if you haven't eaten these things, by the way, it's 100% Wagyu beef from our friend 𝐷𝐸𝐽 in Utah. There's no jerky out there that even comes close to comparing to it. So
it really isn't.
With that being said, we got a couple more questions to get through, which will allow me to probably eat at least 2 more of them. And I'll keep you up to speed on that, Jeff. So Randy, next question for you. What kinds of conditions would accelerate, a transition from people psychologically deteriorating to the point where they become a community threat, to the point where the neighborhood gets dangerous? What can accelerate somebody from, point A to point B? And you can pick one thing up that I think will play a big role, and that's population density. I think this stuff accelerates a lot faster in a dense urban environment than it does in a rural environment.
Well, it does, because just like I told you in Baghdad, whether it was the 3 days of looting or the criminal activity before, or even some of the stuff that was going on before, as we hit Baghdad, before we hit Baghdad, when we were out in the rural area, if you came across some bad guys, it might be 7, it might be 10, 12, pack a group of folks. But when we pulled into Baghdad, then you were talking about packs of 100 and 200 men.
Wow.
So there's a big difference in disparity right there. And what I noticed in those bigger cities, more of those packs came out, right? So they will, no different than the remnant. There's probably some people that are already planning this because they have the resources. They know it's coming, and they know what they're going to have to come out and take their area, so to speak, and they will do that. But I would say, I'm sorry, clue me in one more time. What was the question I need to answer? I apologize.
You're supposed to talk for longer so I can. Oh,
I'm going to. I just want to make sure I'm heading in the right direction.
I'm telling you, man, you can't run a V8 on a gallon of gas, and I ain't stopping it. This is number 4. Just saying. The question was, what type of events would push people from that psychologically deteriorated position into just being, downright violent and dangerous?
Hey, some people, it will be the event itself. And let's just take a look right now, as we talked about, and Khalid spoke to here recently, how much shorter the time frame for being able to radicalize somebody over online has collapsed and shrunk down significantly. And why is that? Because if we just look across our own nation right now, on both sides, right and left, or what they think is right and left, look at what we see going on, between the discourse, and it's doing nothing but ramping up and getting more and more, right? I mean, so people are already at a pitch fever. The people that are already right there, their little meters tapping out, when this happens, poof, and nobody knows what happens once your little meter blows up, and now psychologically you're damaged and broken, and no telling what you're going to do. That will happen to some folks. Now, some folks, it'll just be that part will then lower them down again, or lower their ability to fight it off more, we'll say, to speak, because the event is going to take a big psychological piece right out of them. Like, I really didn't think this could happen, but now it's actually happened. And when they have to admit it, that's going to take a piece of them right there. Now, let's say somebody they love gets killed or dies somehow in that. And you're going to see people then further just slide right off. And it's what, you've heard me say this term. And if you see somebody where the cheese has slid off the cracker, that's what we're talking about. And unfortunately, for mentally, emotionally, that's exactly what it's like. You have an event and stuff starts sliding and going, and there may be something that helps it just go right off. And those people mentally break. And when that happens, we don't know what they're going to do. Hey, they may just sit out in the middle of the street and just sit there and do nothing until they get killed, run over, or whatever. Some of them may go off and start killing people. Let's just take the example of the guy. We know now it was medication, but remember the guy in Afghanistan? It's been quite a few years because I haven't heard his name, or I think he's in prison. I don't know if anybody really knows what happened to him, but he all of a sudden just went off and then killed like 14 civilians, left his camp, went out and killed 14 civilians and got in trouble over it. Now we know it's probably because he had head injuries, but they also were giving him that medication that we used to call, you had nightmares from taking this stuff.
Good answer. I managed to knock out another stick.
Are you talking about methaquin?
Yes, there we go.
That'll give you psychotic episodes. It's a malarial drug, but it will. I had a friend who was in the Komodo Strait in Indonesia on the way to Komodo Island in a boat with about 10 people on a small boat. And the biggest guy on the boat, who was really nice guy, he was a zoologist, great dude. They were all taking methaquin. He had a psychotic episode. It took everybody to restrain the guy.
Good stuff. By the way, I want to say a thank you here to True Texan for the tip and a recommendation for a 4-way sillcock key. If you're not familiar with a sillcock key, pretty much every commercial building, in the entire country has a valve on it, usually in the front of the building. And if you have a sillcock key, it's like a different size Allen key, basically, hex head, that you can open up that sillcock key. So if you've got a multi-story commercial building and let's say there's no water available, when you turn that sillcock key, all the water that's being held in all those pipes and even potentially a holding tank on the roof, you'll have a great source of water. So definitely a good tip on the part of True Texan there. Go ahead,
so
Randy.
I just wanted to finish up and close it really. My point was also we look at all the SSIRs and all the other mental health medication that they're giving people today. It's rampant. And then you look at the side effects, all of them have, you want to kill yourself. They all have suicidal. And I guarantee you there's many of them, just like the Meliquin, that have a homicidal tendency too. They're just not going to tell you. They're not going to disclose it. But the problem is, it's not going to take very much for those folks who are already dialed up for something to happen that will send them over the edge.
Top 2 side effects of SSRIs for most people are suicidal ideation and homicidal ideation. So the drugs they're supposedly giving people who are mentally weak to start with compound the issue and typically end up making them even more mentally ill. I mean, we spoke at length on this one. I call it the 1,000 milligram stare because you can tell when these Karens are jacked up on SSRIs.
Well, it's the same thing with transgender people. You get people who are having a mental issues to begin with. You're a guy who thinks you're a girl, or a girl thinks you're a guy. and then you flood them with hormones. Gee, what could possibly go wrong?
Yep, exactly. And I want to choose my words carefully here, not because I give a crap about using the right words, but I know what CommuTube is like. They'll give me a strike if I don't kind of phrase this the right way. The things that people got during Charlie 19 that went there, there's now, I've read 3 studies now that say that every single person, whether they took one or one plus a bunch of boosters, 100% have 2 things. One of them is microplastics in their bloodstream, which pile up and turn into clots eventually. And the other one is essentially, I don't know how they measure it and stuff, but a higher level of anger and aggression than they had prior to that. And I'm not sure how they baseline that and figure it out, but you take things like that, and then you add SSRIs, and then you add our, society that is disassociated itself from everybody. Neighbors don't talk to each other. People live in front of their, weapons of mass distraction. It's no wonder this stuff happens. So, Jeff, I got an intel question for you at the neighborhood level. How do you maintain community intelligence on the state of mind for people around you without being too obvious and without creating friction that may lead to a worse situation? Like, what is your suggestion for keeping some intel on the people surrounding you?
Well, you've got to talk to them and talk to others. If there's someone and they're a friend or even an acquaintance, you touch base with them. Hey, how you guys doing? How if anything you need, we're doing this, we're doing that. Have you seen you have any problems, any issues? So you approach it positively, like you're there to help solve their problems. But you engage them in a conversation and then think back to what they were like the last time you talked to them and see if there's been any major differences. If it's someone you really don't have that kind of relationship with, talk to their neighbors and say, hey, how's everything going down on this cul-de-sac? How's everybody? Hey, how's Bill? How's Tom? How's, Mr. Jenkins over there? And if you have one person in there who who knows them, it's secondhand information, but it's better than nothing. And, you got to be subtle. You don't want people thinking that you're, keeping files on everyone, even though you probably really are. But if you approach it as in a helpful manner, that you're you're potentially providing them a benefit, you're more likely to get a positive response. But there's nothing better than frickin' talking to people.
Yeah, good advice. Good advice. I see somebody went by, was asking in the live chat about these people in the sewers in New York City. So there was a video released today of the 3rd incident in New York City, and I did a video on it last night. There's something definitely going on there, and I'll get right back on topic immediately here, but I will say this, another piece of information that came out today, before the NYPD released their statement saying, we looked into it, it's nothing, don't worry about it. They went and met with Ma'am Dammy, and that's what Ma'am Dammy apparently told them to say. So I don't know if there's any truth to that or not, but it wouldn't surprise me. Go ahead, Jeff.
I read an article about that. I think it may have been in the New York Post, where they said, this is not new, and that they have busted people going into the sewers for years, because what they do is they go down there and they look for watches, jewelry, wallets, especially down in the Wall Street area, because if someone drops, if they drop a phone or something into the sewer and it goes in there, they're not going to be able to go down and get it. So these guys go down there. A lot of times they'll have metal detectors, and they're looking for wallets, and they get the credit cards, they get the cash, rings, everything.
Well, in these 3 situations, though, are quite a bit different than the treasure hunters, in that they're going in and out of these manhole covers with pickaxes, shovels, sledgehammers. They're not taking typical treasure hunting stuff down there. My bet is that it's on jihadis, because I looked at some enhanced video of it, and there are multiple individuals who definitely look like they're of Middle Eastern descent, 20s and 30s. sort of thing. If it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. But Randy, getting back on tonight's topic here, what role do you think faith will play in determining which individuals, which households, and which communities hold together when they're going through an SHTF scenario?
Well, I think the people that rely on that will be better off regardless. Is it going to be a protect you from all and keep you alive? Maybe not. But here's the fact. Now, I know there's some people in the chats. When I've said this before, I've said, hey, I know God's God, he'll take care of me. And people say, well, you better learn to rely on yourself. Guess what? That's what got us in this situation to begin with. Because we thought in the garden that we should just take over and we can make our own decisions. And we got bounced out. That's what put us on this road to begin with. Now, here's the fact. So no matter what happens, because even God used the Babylonians to rout the Israelis after, they roused his anger because they didn't keep their covenants with them. They didn't keep their word after all the miracles he bestowed upon them and right in front of them. So faith will matter, because faith is what gives you hope to keep going on. And, I'll go back to the movie quote that, I like to use from one of the old Clint Eastwood movies, where he's trying to run these folks out, and Clint Eastwood's the pastor, Pale Rider, and the bad guy, the dad, comes back into town and asks his son and the others, okay, what's going on? Then what about those folks? Well, they let this preacher come in, and he's like, what? You let a preacher in there? Have you lost your mind? Because 1 ounce of faith and they will be dug in like Alabama Tex, and we'll never get them out. And that's what faith does for you. Maybe it won't save your life as your mortal life, but trust me, if you have faith, you believe in God, and you have accepted Jesus Christ as your Savior, you're not going to die. You will continue on somewhere else, but your mortal body will be dead. So that's all coming for all of us, regardless if you get through this next venture or not. We're all human. We're all going to die. None of us get out of here alive, but faith will give you more strength and more endurance and everything else that are gifts from God that we've always had access to. And yes, that will help some people get through, and certainly without losing their minds and going nutso or whatever and having emotional and mental breakdowns right in the middle of everything happening. That faith will give you the strength and the mental fortitude to not do that.
Well, good choice of words, emotional, mental breakdowns. I saw somebody that went flying by in the comments saying that they didn't know what SSRIs are. So these are antidepressants. You have absolutely heard of them before. Prozac, Zoloft, Lexapro, Paxil, and the list goes on and on. There was a study done 2 years ago where 62% of white females, I want to say the age range was something like between 20 and 50 maybe, 62% admitted to taking SSRIs on a daily basis, which means the number is probably more like 82%, because some people wouldn't admit to it for sure. These are very evil drugs, evil drugs that once they get a hold of you, they don't let go of you. People who try to go off them usually end up even more violent than they were when they were on them, but it makes people mentally unstable. And it all comes from, and this, listen, this is germane to our conversation tonight, because as Jeff and Randy and I mentioned, when you get into these high stress environments, people have outsourced the security and they're taking these drugs. They're a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. If you're on SSRIs, I would encourage you to do everything possible to get off of them. They typically amplify the illness. They don't fix it. And here's the last number, and then I'll move on to the next question so we can wrap this up. 1951, we had 550,000 inpatient beds in psychiatric care facilities in America. We have less than 40,000 now, because the entire medical industry, especially psychiatry in particular, because they can write scripts, is, well, we don't need to put these people in mental asylums anymore. We'll just treat them with drugs. And it's a bad deal, man. I got a nasty gram from somebody who said that I was an asshole for pounding on this topic, SSRIs. And it was actually, unfortunately for that particular person, proved my point. So anyway, with that being said, Jeff, I want to get your thoughts. You get last kick at the can here. What's the single most important move a household can make right now to protect itself from a threat environment in an urban or suburban environment in an SHTF scenario?
From what we've discussed tonight, I'd say get to know your neighbors.
Good point.
Assess who you can rely on and who is a potential problem and who is just dead weight. I can tell you in my neighborhood, I can go house by house and tell you who has guns, who's a hunter, who has military experience, who has law enforcement experience, pretty much every house in this neighborhood. And, who has handheld radios, who has, different, various equipment, who has ammunition. We've discussed that in my neighborhood, not necessarily for, the end of the world or SHTF situations, but, after, the George Floyd riots, and we're like, okay, if someone decided to loot our neighborhood, across the street from us is a retirement community. I'm sure they would look at it as easy pickings. It wouldn't be, because there's a boatload of, former Marines and Army people and everything else. But I could see people coming out here saying, well, this will be easy pickings for looting. So yeah, you know who your neighbors are, because you need to know who you can depend on and who you can't.
Yeah.
Who's an asset and who's a liability.
Good advice per usual. Before we move into identifying the X and getting off of the X, one more reminder: Carnival bulk buy ends in 4 hours, and once it's gone, it's gone. This is a pretty healthy discount. Off the top of my head, I think if you buy 4 bags of beef on the normal prices right now, it works out to like $47 and change per bag of beef. But if you buy it on this, basically, thank you bulk promotion from Carnival, I want to say it's like $41 and change. It's gone in 4 hours. So I just wanted to make sure that you all had that. So identifying the X and how to get off of the X, we started doing this a couple months ago. We've done it previously under a different name, but in this type of scenario, the X is basically treating psychological resilience as a given rather than a capability that needs to be built, and leaving your household without, the framework to make sound decisions when the weight of like a sustained crisis begins to just wear you down, collapse your judgment, collapse everybody's, state of mind around you. So the first one, Randy, I'll let you speak to it. And you don't have to have a mad gear planner for this. I'm not suggesting that you do, but have something written down that says, okay, when the fecal matter hits the oscillating device, these are our plans. In other words, this is how we get out of here if we have to. This is what we do if somebody comes knocking on the door and they have, guns, so on and so forth. Give me your thoughts on putting a plan together, because the old adage, Randy, comes to mind. If you fail to plan, then clearly you plan to fail. So go ahead and run with that one, Randy.
Well, it's just, it's the same thing I told you, like you have that list there. And even when you're in special operations, I certainly had it in the infantry, but even in special operations in a group and on a team, we were given a packing list when we deployed. This is what and basically it's just about everything that you were issued anyway. And so, but you have that packing list, and then all your SOPs are written down. You know what I mean? You have different books and other kinds of things, or even on computers and folders, depending on what you're using. But you have all that written down. And then, same thing we do, just like the IED that, mine was an EFP, but it's an IED drill. And so, one thing we did was we went through every type of scenario that we could possibly end up in before we ever left. And we practiced and we practiced and we figured out, okay, this is what works. This is how we're going to do it. And we made an SOP. And the reason is, and it's just the other part, as I've always said, you know, we don't make just one plan or two plans or even three. It's 5. You know, pace. Pace is the way to go. And I'm sorry, PACE. I'm sorry, 4. So anyway, the reason you want to make a plan is because you've thought through what may happen and what your response may be or what you think it's going to be. Because we all know nothing goes to plan. I don't care how well you plan, and you need to. That doesn't mean shrug it off, because there's something about psychologically being prepared, right? As we talked about before, even in school when we were in test, if we studied and we were prepared and we got ready for the test, you felt a whole lot better when you walked in the class that day to take that test. It's just a psychological thing. But the reality is, even if you have a plan that doesn't go according to plan, at least you already thought through some of that stuff. So when something drops in your lap, you just pivot to the other part of the plan or whatever you worked out in a different way. And that's all it is. You just pivot. So that makes it much easier than instead of getting caught flat-footed like, oh, crap, something just happened and that wasn't planned. It didn't go according to plan, and we didn't think about it. We didn't have something else. And that's why. One, so you have the confidence to be, and I'll go back because, I like movie quotes, Man of Fire, right? And what did he tell the little girl as he taught her to swim? Well, as he watched her swim, you're the fastest swimmer in the pool, but the slower off the block. So what do you need to do? And then what did he pound the rest of the time? Are you prepared or not prepared? And that's really what it's all about. No different than Mike's book, Prepared, right? Because that's an important word. And the more prepared you are with your plan, the better off you're going to be, even when it goes to shit.
Do you want to talk about faith at all before I go to Jeff for the last?
Yeah, so I'll just recap on the faith piece, right? Because here's another part that faith does for you, right? And I mentioned it on the guy that was in Black Hawk Down in Somalia. I also was at a ceremony in 10th group a few years back where the guy got a silver star, and he got a silver star for going and getting the body of his team sergeant who had been shot and killed, who was on a 4-wheeler when he did get shot. They all were, and they were running for cover. The team sergeant got killed. He fell off the deal. And so he basically said a prayer right before he went out and got him. And he assumed that he was going to be killed trying to do this, but he was still going to go do it regardless. And you know why? Because he had faith. Faith is going to be the only thing that helps you get up and move when you are scared to death. And when certain situations, if they happen and they play out in your area, you are going to be scared to death. So I'll take the words of the guy from Black Hawk Down, right? And he knew, right? And that's what it came to him. He finally came to the, because one of the things you have to do in combat is you have to already accept that you're dead. You're probably not going to make it through this. You're already dead. And then you have a little faith, and you can then take one step in front of the other, where you may just be froze in place if you didn't have any. And that still could happen, but faith will help get you out of there. And basically, the guy came to the realization, I'm good either way, because I'm going to go do my job, and I'm going to go out here. I'm going to help rescue these people, although there was nothing but withering enemy fire through every street, everywhere they went, every block. And so he knew, though, I'm either going to come out and I'll make it home, even if I get wounded. And then guess what? I'm going to be happy because I'm at home with my wife and kids. But if somehow, unfortunately, this was my day to die and I get killed during this event, I'm going right to heaven. So what I see next will be Jesus in heaven. And guess what? I'm going to be happy. So I can't lose either way. And he went out and did his job like nobody else did that day. And as I mentioned previously on the show, other warriors, including dudes from CAG, came up and said, hey, I don't know what you had yesterday, but I want to know what it was, because you performed like we've never seen anybody perform. And these guys are true professionals in combat. So if it was enough that they noticed, and some of them picked this up and ran with it ever since. So they adopted that same policy. And the fact of the matter is, faith is going to give you the ability to realize just what I just said. Even if you're killed, you are going to heaven. So you're not going to die. This body will die, but you will go to heaven. And that just seems to give you the strength that you need. And then again, it gives you access to God's strength and faith. And that is what you need to get in those moments when you are scared to death and you know for certain you're going to die in the next few minutes. And again, as I said, even though some of those times, and a lot of times you won't, but that's what you're going to think because of what's going on. And you're pretty close to being right.
I'm watching this like it's I don't know what you would call it, like Randy Vision or something. It's like a new kind of TV where you can almost like reach out and touch them. It's crazy clear. Jeff, the third suggestion that I put in the brief for people to do now to be prepared for this stuff is to map out a baseline of let's say the 5 to 7 closest households. Basically establish a baseline for their behavior, like make notes on each of the people, what their demeanor is typically like, so that you can actually detect a difference if, said fecal matter hitting the oscillating device impacts them. I'd like to hear your thoughts on like, what would you include in a profile of somebody in that type of exercise?
I would get an assessment of a basic assessment of their demeanor. Are they an introvert? Are they an extrovert? Are they talkative? Are they quiet? Are they the kind of person who kind of takes over a conversation, or are they the kind of person that sits back and watches and absorbs? Different personality types have different uses. I would also try and figure out, okay, did they have any prior military experience? Were they any law enforcement experience? Are they hunters? Are they hikers? Are they someone who is familiar with the outdoors? Also, something you want to know. And get an assessment of them. There's some people you meet and you just kind of get that creepy feeling that they're kind of smarmy and you don't trust them. That's something that trust your instincts on that. Because, your subconscious gets that is your subconscious is probably better at assessing people. And those are the kind of folks you want to keep an eye on too. But also get to find out who else is in their household. You don't meet just the head of the house, but the others. And if for no other reason, if you see him walking down the street, you can go, okay, that's Bob's son, Tommy. Okay, haven't met him, but I recognize him. So that if they're a stranger in your neighborhood or if they belong there. But I would look at also who owns guns, how often do they shoot? Do they have a gun that grandpa left them, or are they active? Do they go out and shoot and practice and that kind of thing? In my neighborhood, damn near everybody has guns. So even the divorced woman who lives by herself has at least 2.
She needs to try harder. That's all I got to say.
Yeah.
I don't know, so during like the whole gun buying thing during Charlie 19, my wife might have got a little bit upset at me, abusing the Amex Platinum. And she said, how many effing guns do you need? And me, I just said, all of them.
No,
what kind of question is that?
The answer is always the same. One more.
Well,
you get that one, and then she goes, well, how many more? One more.
I want all of them. So that's all there is to it. So with that being said, a couple quick things here to share with y'all. Greg Wasatch from Wasatch Wagyu has come out with another bundle. And this time it's a hybrid. It's a mix of the sticks and the strips. So here's both of them. If you can see the small picture of me, this is $60 worth of jerky. He's discounted at 50% to $29.99. Use my discount code S as in Sam, D as in David 20. So SD20. That'll knock it down to $23.99. I do not get affiliate income from Wasatch Wagyu. I do not get affiliate income from Carnivalt. They help me defer some pretty hefty expenses. Software subscriptions alone right now are averaging $7,500 to $8,000 a month because of some of the higher end AI models I use, like Higgsfield cost me $1,000 a month, and it's very much appreciated. So if you go buy from them, though, they'll keep helping us offset expenses. You can't beat this one with a stick. If you haven't been to our Substack, survivaldispatch.news, here it is. $7 a month or $70 a year. You get full access to everything that we have. You get behind the scenes stuff. You even get access to my private element server. Look at this. I checked the messages midday today, and these are all different rooms, forums, whatever you want to call them. Look at the number. I think it adds up to, if just off the top of my head, there's another 370, 380 messages since I checked it this afternoon. Covers everything from a general chat. There's a library of resources. You can ask me questions. You can ask Khalid questions. Khalid is back to checking in very frequently. ThreatWire is intelligence related to terrorist threats. We've got a survival prepping channel, and the list goes on. But again, for $7 a month or $70 a year, you get a ton of stuff. And again, here it is, survivaldispatch.news. If you're not following my fictional audio podcast, Survival Dispatch Remnant, why? Why are you not following it? If you're into survival prepping, you like post-apocalyptic content, this is an unwoke version of The Walking Dead, and it's a realistic version. There's no 100-pound women beating the shit out of 250 guys who are fit. There's no zombies. There are people who've been affected by some chemical and biological and nuclear warfare things that led to this, apocalypse. But it's in episode 11 was released last weekend to paying subscribers. It'll be released to the public this coming weekend. This weekend, episode 12, part 1 and 2 will be released Saturday and Sunday. Go read the comments on it. This really struck a nerve with people. So not only is it entertaining, there's lots of survival prepping lessons woven into it, but in a very entertaining method. We've got the core family as the Smith family, but there's multiple other characters in it. You're going to see J.J. Morris before too long. You're probably going to see Mike Glover in there before too long as well. So survivaldispatchremnant.com. I'll put it down in the live chat when the closing video is playing. And last reminder, you have 4 hours and 3 minutes to take advantage of the Carnivalt bulk buy. All the links are down below in the description, whatever platform you're on, but I will put them in the live chat. Again, I'll be back tomorrow evening, usual time, 7 p.m. Eastern, and I've got a special report on the FIFA World Cup and all of the security threats, terrorist threats, all the things you need to be aware of if you're in the one of, I think it's 16 different cities between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. Vast majority of them are here in America. It's just going to be a security nightmare for a whole bunch of reasons. Watch tomorrow night's episode and you'll get the whole lowdown on that. I think that's basically it, gentlemen. I appreciate your time and insight. As always, everybody out there, stay alert, stay strapped, get off the X. It's Chris Evans signing off. God bless our law enforcement officers. God bless our military. God bless America.
God bless America.
God bless.
Enjoy the closing video. It's a brand new one.